So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I would love for us to go around the horn and introduce ourselves. And Chara, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. We'll do reversed order of how we talked about our projects.
I'm Chara. I'm one of the co-founders of RevenueHero. So RevenueHero automates inbound scheduling and routing. So all sales folks need to do is look for a meeting schedule notification, talk to the customer, qualify them, and update opportunities. We actually make life that easy for sales folks. Some of the co-founders, I used to build product, and then I switched over to the dark side, so to say, and now head marketing and ops, and realize all the things I've made fun of and thought was trivial. And now I'm learning all the life lessons that, rightfully should be learning.
How I felt when I moved from sales ops to marketing ops. Oh, are these things different? Jess, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jess Tao. I've been marketing operations and marketing technology for 15 years or so, and previously been at large enterprise companies, cybersecurity at Cloud Provider at F5, running marketing operations and marketing technology and analytics as well. Yeah, and I specialize kind of in the Adobe MarTech ecosystem, doing digital transformations for large companies.
Awesome. Brooke?
Yeah, hi everyone. I am Brooke Bartos, Director of Marketing Operations and Analytics at Invoice Cloud. I've been over here for about 4 years, came into an in-house role from a few years of consulting. So I've moved back and forth from in-house to consulting throughout my career. I've been in marketing operations and MarTech for over 10 years. Marketo was where I started out before moving into the operations and analytics a little bit more broadly. Very excited to be here.
Hi, my name is Harjot Singh. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing Ops and Analytics at Lyra Health. I've been with Lyra Health for almost 2.5 years. Have been in marketing ops and analytics for almost 10 plus years, working with companies like Uber, LiveRamp, and Hitachi in the past. I've started in the days when there was a tool called ExactTarget. That was my first tool from a marketing point of view that evolved. And then I moved over to the Marketo side of things and have worked in the Marketo ecosystem after that. So really looking forward to our webinar today.
It was very relatable. When I started as a CRM admin, I think it was Goldmine or Act. It was a long time ago. I just aged myself. I'm Camelyn Thompson. I'm head of marketing at the RevOps Co-op, but don't let that fool you. Before then, I was in sales, marketing, and CS ops, kind of moving around in B2B SaaS for 15 years before that, managing systems and databases. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen and get the presentation kicked off. So today, I assume you know that we are talking about optimizing inbound conversions. And Chara, you're going to have to tell me when to kick off the poll. Should I do it now or should I do it later?
Yeah, both slides fine.
Okay.
So the poll, yeah.
Poll. Yeah, I'm a little off today. I think it was the sealant for the grout. So would love to know your company's average lead response time. And we had a lot of time signals. I thought maybe we'd add in, we don't, and it depends on the lead source. We should have probably also asked which function you're in, because I think sometimes the perspective differs, because as the marketer versus as someone supporting sales, my viewpoint was often a little different. Okay, it looks like we're about done. So, got a couple more and share results. Okay. So it looks like we have a really good distribution of under an hour, and then kind of broken up a bit evenly between within 24 hours and after 24 hours. It's always a little stressful to see how many say we don't. And I hope it's just we don't follow up on all of them. But, I've been at companies and found that none of the lead forms were routing. So you never know. That's scary. So we're here today to talk about findings that RevenueHero has published. And it's interesting how much the results differ. So, Chara, do you want to talk a little bit about how you came to this data?
Yeah. So we did the chop wood carry water approach of trying to actually go through the process of trying to contact B2B SaaS companies in the 50 to 500 employee size range. And after going through manually submitting the demo request CTAs for all these companies, 1,000 B2B companies to be exact, the results were it's actually pretty similar to the results we're seeing, where 24 plus hours was the common trend for their highest intent CTA, right? Like you have a requested demo CTA on your page and somebody's asking you to talk to your sales team. But what was consistent was that it took companies around 29 hours to respond back. And of the 1,000 companies, what's also shocking from the results was that 635 companies never even responded. But that's not just to say, hey, these companies don't care about their inbounds or that the sales teams aren't processing the leads, right? It's also a combination of probably disqualifying us based on the information they have on us. But even of the folks who did respond, it took them around 29 hours, which is a day and 5 hours, which is what led us to think, hey, why do companies still in 2025 take more than a day to respond when there's a really high intent inbound request coming through?
I think what's really shocking to me is that so many B2B SaaS companies are complaining about a dearth of pipeline, and we have 36.5% of companies responding to a demo request. That's unnerving to me. Is anyone else having a gut reaction to these findings?
I think if I think about it a little bit more, we might be in that bucket of saying people who did not respond at times, because getting more prudent to begin with is important. And that's what we find helpful also. Like if you are sending all the leads to your sales team, they get overburdened. But so just making sure you've got the right account match, right persona match upfront, and only forwarding the ones that are high intent and the right fit to the salespeople, that's helpful. But I think what is missing here is just not responding is not good too. Like having some kind of an automation where you are not right fit would be the right response in that case. And that's what we tend to do. And that could be improved upon in my perspective.
Well, and perhaps some nuanced questions about, are you already filtering out? So I would expect we're already filtering out a lot of non-fit. They're going to find a few, but that should be put into a nurture sequence. How do you folks look at pre-qualifying some of the leads? Like what falls on marketing versus what falls on the salesperson who's covering this, or AI, or whatever you're using?
I think that's a huge challenge. I face sure that, at many of the companies, right? Like do you allow anyone who fills out demo form, right? We want to have a 5-minute SLA. Great. Now it gets in the gray area. If they gave you a non-company email address, right? But how many people want to fill out a demo form and actually give you your company email when you know that you're going to get a phone call? There's so much gray area. Then you're also dealing with, they hit the BDR SDR team, and basically they're all making human judgments, different human subjective judgments of whether I want to follow them or not. A lot of them will say, like, oh, well, they're too small. They're making that assumption based on the data that they have, and it's dependent on what data that they're able to see and get passed on into their viewpoint. And what happens if on that day marketing came back from a huge conference and they just got flooded with 200 leads in their patch? Then what? Right. And so you're playing with all of these different variables, and it was a constant battle, which is, we have all these demo leads. Why are you following up on them if they're not worth it? Like, how do you know if you're not worth it? What data are you looking for? And I think everyone has their own opinion. And so I think it'd be interesting. I'd be really interested to hear, like, okay, with AI and tools, like 2 points, like, okay, if you don't want them, do we send them to AI first? Do you need to qualify them? How do we qualify them?
And maybe it's helpful to talk about how we even find what's marketing qualified and how to calculate what our ICP really is, because this is one of the things I see a lot of instinct and gut reaction and recency bias playing into versus actually looking at what's the bread and butter of our company's customer, like what profile are we looking for? So should we talk about that maybe a little bit and then get back into struggles with lead routing?
Yeah. But the other thing to think about is with all the sales best practices that companies have layered on, right? From your bands to your analytics to all the frameworks that have just been drilled into sales teams. What's also happened is even when a qualified prospect comes in, of course, we need to define qualification and what an MQL is and so on. But even when a qualified prospect comes in, there seems to be a lot of friction in a lot of sales teams' mind to just open up availabilities of the sales folks and get those meetings booked. Primarily because, hey, what if they're not qualified? And so you always have the question of, as an ops person, would you rather take more meetings and potentially get a better chance at hitting a pipeline target? Or would you take lesser meetings, qualify it manually, and risk a lower target just to save time on your calendar, right? So I think once you do have the qualification criteria agreed upon, even if it varies a little bit, there still seems to be friction based on research for sales teams to just talk to the person who's willing to talk and just allow meetings to get booked on their calendars, right? So that's also something we've observed quite often.
Well, alignment on the qualification piece I've found is such a tedious step that a lot of people, because the two teams are fighting and it's hard to get in the middle. Maybe, Brooke, could you talk a little bit how you navigate this and really work to establish a common definition?
Yeah. So in some respects, I'm a little bit lucky. I've got a bit of a split business that we have here at Invoice Cloud, in the sense that one of the areas that we go to market in is government. And it's really easy because we have a very defined TAM and SAM. There are not new governments spinning up in somebody's garage overnight. We know exactly who our qualified buyer is. Right? Seems that way.
So I don't know.
The business is very easy, and it makes it really easy for our teams to align on what are the sizes of work of who we're going after. Now, we have other areas of the business that are much more wide open and a little bit more traditional. And that's where, as we start to think about it, there is a defined target, right? Who are we going after? What is the size? What are some of the features or characteristics of an audience in that group? And that helps us to define too in advance. We operate in a very account-based motion. So if it's somebody that comes in, we're intentionally focusing on trying to get in front of a target account, and we get a demo request, boom, they're on the fast track, right? That better be a 5-minute SLA. Get them over there as quick as possible. Then it's kind of tiered out after that. If it's something that's still a really good fit and we want to expedite that, that's going to go to the front of the line. Similar to some of the others, though, we do have folks that will hit our demo request forms that are just absolutely not the right fit for our product. Our product isn't a standalone solution. It requires an integration with a partner. So if somebody comes in and says, hey, I want this for personal use, we know right away that's not a good fit. We can kind of disqualify that and say, send a quick email of, hey, this isn't what we do, and move on from there. And so we've got a lot of those really defined pieces of what we're looking for or what we need to be able to even sell to those accounts that help us prioritize that. But that's also something I've done, in consulting in the past is what are the characteristics? What are we looking for? What does the sales team need to be able to sell or make it worth the business's time to do that? There's a cost that goes into that. Once you figure that out, that can definitely help with who are you routing to? What are the SLAs? Are we enforcing those? Do we notify a manager if we're not hitting those SLAs? Getting that alignment is crucial.
I used to joke that salespeople gossip like biddies in a knitting circle, even when I was in sales operations. So once you establish like what's truly qualified, how do you deal with some of the myth busting where we're dealing with recency bias? We're looking at what somebody else has told us about what works or doesn't on the sales team. Are you relying on sales enablement? How are you working with the sales team to kind of level up the people who are misinformed?
Yeah, I mean, A lot of it is just sitting and having conversations, number one. If you're not meeting with your sales ops teams, your sales leaders on a regular basis and having conversations about these, you should. You're already behind the ball there. And, really being able to figure those pieces out. You asked the recency bias. Sure, that's a big piece. The what's working and what's not. Having everybody aligned on the definitions, though. Everyone agreeing who we're going after and why, especially if you have an account-based motion. What are your top accounts? Why are they the top accounts? What is it about them that matters? That's also going to help you be able to look beyond that too and say, okay, well, if that's a tier 1, what would a tier 2 look like? And how do we identify what we're going to fast track, even if they're not in that top account segment right now? How do we still make sure that the juice is probably worth the squeeze there and maybe there's some low-hanging fruit? How do we still make sure that gets the right attention? Go ahead.
Another interesting conversation about the definition of what is our ICP, what is our accounts. And in the past, I've used modeling, right? Like kind of do one of two ways. One, if we're trying to build a predictive model, and I've done that in partnership with companies like Demandbase, where they offer that. It takes the subjectivity out of it. It's like, okay, does marketing and sales agree on the methodology, right? We agree that we're taking our data, we're looking retrospectively on who are the accounts, we're taking on that we're going to let the machine do the learning and tell us, because no human being with human eyeballs can crunch all of the different data, right? Which includes things like, are they expanding their hiring for a particular department? Like if you're selling into IT, their IT department, they're hiring a lot. So those are the different signals that there's no human being beyond our favorite, right? Company size, revenue, number of employees, and job title, right? We can all better all of our careers on those 4 things, but there's so much more than those signals. So if it's a much higher percentage of success that I'm going to be able to align with sales and agree on the methodology, and then let the machine learning or the predictive algorithm that, okay, demo person is here or demo coming in, we use the predictive algorithm, it gets a score, yay or nay, and then that makes the routing easier, the decisioning easier. And then it's like, okay, if you don't hit, then you go into the nurture or self-serve or community. If you do, then you get like 5-minute SLA. And if you're somewhere in between, then maybe it's a 4-hour SLA. But then it takes the subjectivity out of it. You're aligning with sales. The probability of all agreeing is much higher. And you're taking the work out of the revolving door of training new BDRs and SDRs to make that judgment call.
So even when one of the things that we've observed when talking to a lot of companies, typically with like lesser volume, maybe higher ACVs, even when all of these constructs are well established, and if not everybody's as lucky as Brooke's situation where the TAM is well defined, it's mostly government, so you have the entire list of companies in your CRM, right? Like, with companies like these, what becomes interesting is even when you have all of this established and there's a qualified demo request, there is always the question of, hey, we only get 40 demo requests a month. What's the point in me instantly letting them schedule my sales team's calendar, let them manually follow up and, find time with the prospect, right? So that's kind of the mindset we've seen quite often, especially in low volume, high ACV SaaS. And it's an interesting conversation to have to figure out why it's okay to not want to talk to your prospects who are qualified and are probably higher probability of getting into pipeline, right? There still seems to be some reluctance in terms of automating it end to end. And that's a conversation for us folks to have with sales and marketing to align them to say, hey, if everything lines up, it's probably not a bad idea to get your sales team's calendars in front of them. And I have the bias of trying to say it, but it would be interesting to understand how you think about situations like that.
So I've run into situations where the inside sales team is optimizing for who will take a meeting versus who will buy. And then the sellers are optimizing for who will buy. So there's not a true profile fit. But Harjot, I would really like to hear from you. What are some things that you've seen that you believe are contributing to this reluctance to just, if we're auto-qualifying them and the system says it's good, why aren't we just letting them book?
Yeah. So I think something that you hit on earlier, Kamala, was that how is that someone compensated, like BDRs, or salespeople, they're both compensated differently, and they both have different motivations in the process per itself. So their motivations define what they're going to enact or prioritize. And that's where sort of the process takes the precedence. And that well-defined process up front is, in our case also, like, we are a little bit lucky that we have all of our TAM defined. We have our buyer personas that are defined. So we know that if that match happens, it is auto qualified at that point, and it's going to be fast tracked, right? So that's, for us, having that is really helpful. And that's how we have aligned internally too, is any account that is part of a territory and is assigned to a salesperson, that is sort of going to be automatically on a fast track if it's the right persona that's coming in, or even if it's a tangential persona. So there's a motivation there to get those meetings in place and having an automated process that's aligned to the TAM directly, right? So that's been really helpful for us to automate. And that's what we're trying to do, is upfront determining the right persona and is this account within our TAM? And then we just sort of get that through the process and get the meeting scheduled using a calendar mechanism.
I love that point, because a lot of times if you're compensating BDRs or ISRs on meeting volume, of course, they're not going to want them to go straight to the AE, because that takes away from their pool of the most likely companies to book.
Well, as I have a, oh, I do want to keep going.
No, go for it. Go for it.
Well, what I'm seeing kind of in more of the starting to, especially when we talk about buying groups, and Chara, what you'd said about, hey, what about these bigger deals, bigger ACV, lower volume? You know, I've seen companies, large companies who are doing this motion, pivot to adding compensation for the BDRs to complete the buying groups, right? So like, it's not just, hey, if one person comes in, they're qualified, let's go book a meeting. Studies have shown, like, if you have more than one, like let's say 3 people in that buying group, and then you book the meeting, the conversion rate is 2x or more higher in terms of converting to pipeline and further on downwind. So to your point, it's like, okay, if the BDRs, you know, are just being like what you had said, what other folks have said, which is the BDRs book the meeting, that's what they're compensated on, right? I've seen other companies change and start adding compensation and completing the buying groups, and then taking that buying group and booking them to the meeting. And that addresses maybe the hesitancy, perhaps, of like, or like, why doesn't the sales rep just go ahead and book it themselves? So just some, you know, just some food for thought. And as buying groups start to emerge,
And that's very valid point, Jessica. I would say that getting buying groups engaged, and that's where we see the highest close loss rate, when there's only one person engaged, right? Because you don't know that's the right person or not, and you're trying to just get the meeting, and if the meeting falls through, the deal sort of, it's silence at that point. But if there are 3 people engaged, and then you get a demo request, there's going to be highly likelihood that the buying group is engaged and it's going to move forward. And that's what we've been trying to experiment, is that maybe BDRs can engage the broader buying group, or we could leverage AI or other mechanisms to have that chatbot engage with some of the tertiary personas, whereas the BDRs focus on the high level personas, which are more likely to be making decisions or getting meetings. So that's a very good point.
I think on the lighter side, one of the pushbacks we've got when we try to work with larger companies to do this is just their rules of engagement. Like, if you already allow like a qualified prospect, let's say there's a SMB prospect that books with the, or the other way around, an enterprise prospect books with the SMB rep. If the meeting's already on the calendar, you're going to then have to deal with double compensation, where the enterprise rep is like, hey, I should have gotten that deal, and the SMB rep is like, but I already have a meeting booked on my calendar. I spoke to them. So you're always going to have to deal with that as well.
it's a whole cultural shift, right? It's a process shift at the companies. The companies that I've seen, that I've worked with, it is a multi-year, full-on cultural shift where you're compensated on, you know, BDRs are compensated on completing. If I increase the number of buying group completion, I'm compensated on that. If I validate multiple people in the buying, I'm compensated on that. So to kind of get the behavior to shift to putting multiple people, right?
It's a good twist on, I've seen a lot of companies trying to compensate on closed won customers, and a lot of BDRs, at least back in the day, if you have a 16-month average tenure and they bounce before the sales even close, they don't benefit from that and aren't really motivated. And Harjot, I see you shaking your head. Please do expand.
Yeah, no, I agree. We were in a similar boat where our BDR team was compensated on a weighted pipeline, which is beyond meeting and even to later stage, not directly closed one. And BDRs were in a very tough spot there because they really could not influence anything beyond meeting schedule. And they really couldn't tell the AE that you've got to progress this forward, or they couldn't do anything to progress this deal forward. So they were actually losing their variable comp because the comp was based on closed one or weighted revenue. So we reversed that to be only focused on meeting scheduled and qualified pipeline, that they have to make sure the meeting happens and it's a qualified meeting. And that's where it ends. They can do a follow-up to make sure the meeting is happening.
I'm smiling because that same argument is often used for why marketers don't want to be responsible for a pipeline and revenue number, but that's a different topic for another. That could be its own webinar.
Exactly.
So I love this question, and Chara, we'll start with you. If you're automating your qualification, how do you balance the experience, speed versus quality?
Yeah, no, and I'll tell you where this is coming from, right? Like in instances where you have a well-defined TAM, an agreed upon qualification criteria, you're always going to have like misfires where your qualification criteria, you probably got somebody who's chosen, let's say, tooling on your form, which doesn't comply with your qualification, they get disqualified. This is a real life example that's happened to us. So we work only with prospects who use Salesforce, HubSpot, Freshworks, or Zoho. We've had somebody who said they don't use any of this, got disqualified. But the disqualification experience that we provide is not just a thank you and then crickets. It's more of, hey, it seems like we're not the right fit right now. But if you feel like we made a mistake, and we'll still love to talk to you for 15 minutes instead of like 30 minutes, 45-minute call that typically happens. And we got like a massive deal who just happened to be using SAP as the CRM, but we're evaluating HubSpot, and they got right back into pipeline. Right? So the question always is, if you do figure out how to automatically qualify, then what should the disqualification experience be? Do you just, I'm assuming if it's governments, you can safely just say, hey, you're probably not the right fit if you're like a 2-person agency who stumbled upon the website by mistake. But what about the rest, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's, to your point, the disqualification experience matters too. And that's certainly something that I've even experienced personally as a software buyer. It can be an experience that people carry with them, especially depending on who your audience is, remembering what that looks like and what that experience feels like. There were times where I was, quote unquote, disqualified because I worked for an agency, but we were the agency of record for a very large global company, and I was their marketing operations lead with a responsibility to help purchase software. And I remember a particular vendor where I was treated very poorly because my title was agency. We certainly didn't go with that software for that company. And as I've continued to move on to be a software buyer later in my career, it's just somebody that I've continued to write off since then because of the negative experience that I received along the way. They're just not going to be the first company that I reach out to or think of as a buyer. So even those people who may not be the buyers in your buying committee, maybe they're influencers, or maybe they are still a low title right now. What's your long game? What does that look like? And that was something two job roles ago that was a big focus of the role that I had, was focusing on nurturing the people who would be our future buyers 2 to 5 years down the road. And so those matter. They absolutely matter.
And especially with all your enrichment tools, like if you're enriching on the form, all the tools are going to throw up like RevOps Co-op or everybody has that on their profile, right? Most enrichment tools that pick up the latest that you added to your LinkedIn profile. You might also be working for a company that's part of your ICP. You're relying on enrichment and disqualifying a lot of your prospects. And like you mentioned, right, if that experience is just silence or you get a wall thrown up, you're going to carry that with you, like you said, right? The worst I've seen is just a thank you and then no emails. You start questioning whether you even submitted the form for a real company or whether it was just a website that just doesn't work, right?
Yeah, I think there's a stat out there that more than half of buyers go with the first vendor who responds. And I've worked in B2C as well, and that was so true. We worked with high-end golf simulators. And so many of the vendors never responded to people, and that's why they got so many of their sales. And I'm sure, I know as a technical buyer, you can put yourself in people's shoes. Of course, that's true. So we have a question from the audience. In your opinions, should sales teams be split between hunters and farmers? And does that make it easier or harder to support with demand generation nurturing? And I have feelings on this, but I would like to open it up to other folks to make sure opinions are covered.
I've seen this happen at Freshworks, right? So I can probably start off. The hunter-farmer split, I think, is slightly tricky because if you have somebody closing deals and then you hand it over to another team that's farming, trying to expand the deal, the one thing that you have to be really careful about is compensation again. Everything seems to tie back to compensation because initially the handoff was instant. You close the deal, you get compensated for how much the deal contributes against your target. You move on, you close the next deal. And then they've probably churned a month down the line, and then the farmer's left holding the bag in terms of their expansion target and not being able to hit those targets. So hunting and farming works if you've gotten compensation right. For example, the way we flipped it in our previous organization was hunters had to hold on to the deal for 3 months after closure. And if in 3 months the deal downgraded, it was still counted against their targets, right? After that switch, it was slightly better. And for farmers, again, the way they were compensated, again, closures were pretty tricky because there are a lot of deals which automatically upgraded. And the farmers were just laughing their way to the bank saying, hey, I'm attaining 300% of my targets. That's the tricky part when you have a hunter-farmer split against just an overall end-to-end account manager who owns closures and wall-to-wall expansion. That's what we've said.
I think it becomes, I've done it both ways and probably multiple times. And I think it's an artificial, it's basically an artificial definition that internally, right? We're doing that to ourselves. And so in one place that where, like in the US, we had split hunters and farmers, but the volume in the other regions doesn't support hunter and farmers. So we couldn't split that in EMEA and APJC, to have that. And so now we're dealing with, from an operations perspective, since we serve globally, we're dealing with 2 different motions, right? Half as hunter farmers, half all together. And you can imagine not only the operational, challenges, but people don't buy that way, right? Like one day I might belong in the patch of the farmer and the next day I might belong in the patch of the hunter. When do I expire from the hunter patch versus the farmer patch? It's like people just want to buy. So I think if we index on and focus to kind of going back to what Brooke said, if we start with what do we want the customer, the prospect experience to be, and we index on that. And with, everyone talks about AI, but I think processes will have an opportunity to be completely redefined with AI. And I think a lot of the reasoning that we came up with hunters and farmers to have people focus, that barrier will come down with the use and the adoption of AI and reimagining processes. We won't need the concept of hunter and farmers anymore because the reason why we had to do this is because we had to focus people on these processes that were wildly different. And I think we're going to see emerging of that and a disappearing of those needs when we bring in more and more of the AI to help with those processes.
So I think personality types and motivators are really important and good indicators of what makes a good salesperson. But I think in the past, a lot of people who didn't value relationships and just wanted to get the sale and didn't care who they were selling to as long as they bought things, they're just really a jerk. And they may have done well in the past, but are they doing well in this market? I don't know. Any other thoughts on that before we talk about handoff missteps?
check me on this. Who was it HubSpot that compensated their sales reps based on renewals? There's somebody that was a big, and it wasn't so much did they sell the deal, but did the customer then also renew? There was an additional compensation bonus. And the focus was to make sure that sales reps were doing a quality job in right sizing and selling the right products to the customer based on the customer's need, not the sales reps' need. And there was a whole long game. I don't know why I'm thinking it's HubSpot that did that. And that was really interesting.
There's a lot of ways I've seen companies try to manage that. Some is clawback, some is the 3-month downgrade retention, some is, a bonus for renewal. I think that's probably one of the there's carrots and sticks, right? Both are effective, but some impact morale more than others. So just proceed with caution on the clawbacks, unless it's something really egregious, which I have also seen.
There's like I said, there's somebody that did it as a really positive benefit and saw a really good impact. And I don't know why I'm thinking it's HubSpot, but that was an interesting thing.
It sounds right, but I can't.
Yeah.
So common breakdowns. To summarize, we have talked about misalignment on qualification definitions. We've talked about what I always heard is cherry picking and salespeople being a little bit more discretionary in who they chase. We've heard about hesitations and automating things, BDR, compensation. Are there other areas that you all would like to call out other than the meeting to opportunity transfer point and failure points before we dig into that one?
Yeah. So I think one of the areas where we've seen this fall on the fail is, like we were discussing earlier, if it's a qualified lead, 5-minute SLA, right? We've seen so many companies where that definition is so loose, where the 5-minute SLA for the sales team isn't defined well enough, where it's just within 5 minutes, you respond to the lead, and then that's it, right? Because the BDRs have responded back to the lead, and then they assume that marketing will take care of the lead. If they don't respond back, it just continues to stay stagnant. That we've seen be the failure point for so many teams, where marketing assumes they've sent it over to sales, they have 5 minutes SLA, they respond in 5 minutes, and then what, right? Because it's an MQL, sales have responded, but so many leads go stagnant after that. And this is primarily because sales teams get away with not updating CRMs just because of the volume, because of so many deals they're following up with. So marketing has no clue about which leads got responded to, where meetings actually booked with those leads, what happened to those meetings, no data on that. So you just have so many leads falling through the cracks as a combination of all of this, right? We've seen it way too often for 2025.
If you don't have a way to recycle automatically leads that are in your queue and not reaching qualification, that's a huge problem. So when somebody raises their hand again, if you don't have a mechanism to raise that as a new lead in front of the salespeople, you've missed a step in your automation. Anyone else want to add on to that and give specific examples?
Well, I could talk specifically about routing and an initiative that when I came in, I had to inherit and fix all of lead routing. Because there's that whole process, but just, routing itself with the person, the people, the group, whoever owned it before, right? We had 400 decision nodes. We were at about 25% errors in lead routing. Like 25% of our leads, good, qualified, happy leads that are pipeline, just fell into the ether, into the abyss, which I calculated amounted to probably over $50 million of lost pipeline. Like, who wants to light more than $50 million of lost pipeline on fire, right? And so I think positioning everything in this step, because as operations people, we're like, we can optimize all of these things. And when I take what we do in marketing operations, and I look at this entire inbound, I look at each step, okay, how much is that in pipeline? How much is that in pipeline? And so that's how I actually use to go and get, whether it's resources, headcount, contractors, money, budget, tie it directly to a pipeline dollar because no one's gonna be like, oh, would you give me, $50,000 to go dig out of the incinerator $50+ million in pipeline? Who's gonna say no to that? And so, that's kind of flipping it around to, I'm sure all of us who have been in operations can find many, many leaks in this pipeline. But if we flip it around to opportunity, to be like, each one of these leaks represents dollars, that means it's opportunity for us to get resources and budget and headcount.
We're all cringing.
Yeah.
No? Why?
Okay, 400 nodes. No, you're so right. But 400 nodes, I'm like, no company is that special. Harjot, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go for it.
I think that's very true. We try to overcomplicate stuff at times, which doesn't need to be. But at the same time, as we are making process changes, we forget some things. One of the things that happened to us is that as we are all more aligned to sort of the account-based selling methodology, leads are becoming less relevant. We were in the same boat, and we try to move to everything on the context side, having a prospect-only database, which is based on contacts. And as we move that, one of the misses that we had was a lot of our lead lifecycle, which was primarily for demo request, now sort of sits in contacts. And if we got sort of a demo request from an existing contact, that went into ether, right? The same way. So I think just thinking about the processes as you're making bigger changes, to think about what's going to happen as you're making big transitional changes to your database is something to keep in mind. And that was a learning reason for us also, that, hey, we've been missing on them because we really didn't have a routing mechanism to make sure those contacts or the sales owners on those contacts are alerted about those demo requests.
Oh, totally. There's actually an article on the RevOps Co-op blog that I wrote about moving over to a qualified account model and why it's necessary to retain some form of contact and lead, because some leads you can't match automatically. But for the most part, with contacts, there still needs to be some kind of mechanism for sales to easily see if someone raises their hand again. It's really difficult to get right. But yeah, I've been there where, whoops, that's kind of a big deal. Chara, I want to make sure we're hitting on all the topics here. What are some questions you'd like to pose to the group with 10 minutes left?
So I think one of the things that we have a lot of discussions about is the early stages of scheduling demo, etc. Right? But when it comes to the follow-ups or the nurtures for folks who take the first meeting but end up ghosting, we've seen a lot of ops folks and companies struggle with actually getting the data from sales teams for operations to then add them to the right campaigns and actually get those folks into the right nurture sequences. So we've automated that away to an extent with our product, right? Where we automate the no-shows, some of the meeting statuses in the CRM. But what is the alternative, right? When you have a huge sales team or you have high volumes and sales teams always occupied with so many deals, so many follow-ups, and you always keep getting the excuses of, hey, but who's going to take care of all these massive revenue opportunities while I'm updating the CRM? So what does work to actually get those meeting statuses updated in the CRM? Because that determines a lot of how you hire folks to nurture, right? Like if somebody got their first meeting booked but ended up not showing up, and your sales teams aren't updating those statuses, you're probably going to have a lot of leads flowing into the ether, like Jessica said.
Yeah, I think
This is the AI automation that I need.
Yeah, we're facing a similar challenge where we track a meeting scheduled as an opportunity stage, as the question was mentioned, but we don't really have a clear way to tell that a meeting really happened, right? And now you don't have that insight, whether it happened or not, or tracking that. So we are thinking about a way to log it as another event, as part of a task event, as meeting that a meeting has happened. So it's still a manual effort that would have to be logged. I haven't found a good way, unless, as you said, we track it as a non-pipeline opportunity stage. That could be another way to think about it.
Right.
Right. So that could be another way to think about it. But right now, we are missing on that part, and it is a big missing part where we don't know whether a meeting happened or not.
Yeah. And I'm not saying this is the right way, but the way I've solved for this in the past is the meeting is it's an early stage opportunity. The stage is omitted from forecasting. And if the salesperson qualifies it, the understanding is that the meeting happened and we have a meeting held checkbox that's checked, date stamped, who did it. They can also do that and disqualify it. So if the meeting's held and they say it's not a fit, they can say, yeah, it was held, but it didn't work. And I've also seen some interesting things around kicking it back to the inside salesperson and how to handle rescheduling. So a lot of times those sit in the inside salesperson's pipeline. They forget to look at them and then they just languish. So I haven't seen the perfect answer. Have other folks solved for it differently?
We have both. We have an early opportunity stage and we have it flagged as a task on the account. And so that way we can build automations around it. We use an opportunity-based funnel within our Salesforce and how our data is structured. We do have a series of early opportunity stages that let us track, are we currently nurturing them? Have we scheduled a discovery call with them? Have they moved on to the demo stage? And for us, it's once they hit the actual demo stage, which actually follows an initial phone call. That demo stage is where a traditional funnel would have like an opportunity creation or a sales acceptance, progressing into really the revenue stages of the funnel. Everything before that, kind of like what you mentioned, Chara, we exclude that from the forecasting as kind of like, hey, this is our pre-qualified opportunities that are sitting over here where there's, we've got some focus or we're looking at these, but they have not progressed yet into that discovery or demo or revenue focused stage.
So with RevenueHero, we automate that process where RevenueHero logs the meeting in a CRM because it's booked through our product. We automate a meeting activity against the contact. And the way we automated this was, if a meeting ends at 10:30 p.m., at 11 p.m., we automatically mark the status as completed. And the sales team is incentivized based on how many meetings they've gotten in round robin. So if it's an actual no-show, we automate a notification to the sales team to say, hey, if it's a no-show, just click this button on Slack and RevenueHero will automatically update it to a no-show. And that they're incentivized to do that because that determines their position in round robin. But it's not just a picture for the product and the way we automate it, but I'll tell you what got interesting after we did that, right? Like ops teams came back to us and said, hey, when you automate the meeting status update, a lot of SDRs don't go and mark that no-show because they're compensated on number of completed meetings. So I don't want that automation. So then we had to build in an option to make that optional where depending on your compensation model, again, there is something with compensation, everything ties back to that. You can you can either automate the meeting status and rely on your teams to go and say the no-show happened, or you can still just notify your sales team. You say, hey, the meeting time's passed. Did the meeting happen or not? And the meeting status remains upcoming. And then the sales team actually goes and updates it based on the way they're compensated.
Yeah, that's why we tied it to qualification and then prompted them if they were disqualifying, did the meeting happen or not? And it was locked down so the salesperson was the only one who could do it. And that kind of helps get around that. But we have a question from the audience. How accurate is the automated qualification feature from CRM and marketing tech stacks? And that is a tricky question because it depends on enrichment and how good your enrichment is. And it depends on how good your admins are at modeling and how often you update said model and whether or not you're using a point system to qualify people. It is so complicated. So we only have 1 minute left. Is there anyone who feels so strongly about this topic that they need to say something? Probably all do.
There's just too many things to talk about, right? Like which region are your prospects primarily from? Because some providers work better with certain regions, certain company sizes. So short answer would be depends.
Is there any parting shots people want? Like, is there one thing you wish you knew earlier in your career that has to do with this topic?
I think a lot of it, Brian, and it's really insightful to hear kind of these things that you're like, hey, you expect all of this adoption and there was so much resistance and pushback. And those are the things that were surprising. Same, like where hey, we basically highlighted which leads are going to convert more for the BDRs. And the response was wildly not what we expected, which was, great, look, we stack ranked them for you. Hey, the response that we got was, then I only want the best ones and I don't want any of the other ones. So humans being human.
All right. I'm going to wish everyone an awesome day because we're at the top of the hour. We hope you got something useful out of this. Thank you to all the panelists for sharing your knowledge. I appreciate it. Thank you.